And hello and welcome, Just a Family. I am your host, Melissa Krechler, and this is giving you something to talk about live TV. This episode is sponsored by a Phoenix Identity, which helps you reclaim your identity and create a life that makes you happy and healthy. So today's episode, we are going to be talking about thriving with disabilities. And this is a huge topic and one that I'm very excited to get into. If you're watching live or if you're catching the replay, please make sure that you like, subscribe, and share and follow us on whatever platform you happen to be catching us on. If you would like to reach out to myself or my co-host, Angela Irwin, please do so through the links in the description, or you can reach us at www.justalivetv.com. And today, my guest host is Angela Irwin. I will hand it over to you to introduce yourself.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Melissa. Hello, everyone. I'm really excited to be here today. I'm joining you from Nice in the south of France. Originally from a tiny farm community in South Dakota, and lived in Colorado for about 12 years and have been in France for the last 12 years, which is really hard to believe. I have a background in marketing, clinical education for medical device companies. And about 5 years ago, I did a career change and am now a confidence coach and speaker. And during the pandemic, I started a nonprofit organization which helps my fellow Cochlear implant recipients with the ongoing cost of their equipment. So I am clinically deaf and I hear with Cochlear implants. So that's where the theme for the episode comes from.
Absolutely. And it's such a powerful theme. There are a lot of people who are living with disabilities that shouldn't be a disability. It's something we all have, right? I have thyroid disease. While that's not a disability, it's something I have to live with. Does it limit certain things? Absolutely. But I still can have a full and fulfilling life, which is what we'd really like to highlight today on having a disability. Now, if anybody is offended by me calling it a disability, I apologize. I do not know what else to call it at this particular moment, but that encompasses so many different things. So that's why I'm using that word. It's not just one disability that we will be talking about, although we will be highlighting being deaf, because that is something that you yourself have experience with. And so I'd like to learn more about that. What's your story, if you don't mind sharing?
Yeah, absolutely. So I was born with normal hearing, to normal hearing parents, and learned to speak, went to school, and thank goodness for the screenings that happened at the beginning of every school year. At least they did when I was growing up, which I'm very grateful for, because in kindergarten, everything was fine. In first grade, they detected a mild hearing loss, which is really unusual because usually in children, you're either born with the hearing loss, you have genetic link to it, or you have a high fever that causes the hearing loss. And I didn't have any of those. Actually, to this day, we don't know what has caused my deafness. But in first grade, like I said, a mild hearing loss appeared, and my parents then took me to a professional audiologist and ENT, ear, nose, and throat doctor. And they said, you know what, we'll keep an eye on it. We'll come back every year, but it won't get worse. Famous last words. My parents did take me every year then for a hearing evaluation to keep an eye on it. And then over the course of 15 years, I slowly lost all of my hearing. It was really a long process, 15 years. And I was never a successful hearing aid user, just couldn't help my type of hearing loss. And I really didn't think I had very many options, but thank goodness, by that time I finished my undergraduate degree, living in Colorado, and in Denver, there was one of the very few at that time in the late 90s, Cochlear Implant Center. And so I am going to be celebrating in May 25 years of being a cochlear implant recipient, which has absolutely just given me a second chance at life and being able to, like you say, thrive with the hearing loss and the deafness.
Absolutely. Now, do you think you'd be thriving even without the cochlear implant? That's a hard question. Sorry. I just throw that one at you.
The honest answer is no. My parents were told when I was in 5th grade that I would not graduate from high school and not to encourage me to go to college, because by then the hearing loss would be so progressed that I wouldn't be able to keep up. And thankfully, well, I don't know, thankfully or not, but my parents actually never told me that they were told that. But living in a tiny town, one of my classmates shared that information with me. His mom was a teacher at the school and she had heard that, so he repeated it. And never told them I knew that. And in a way that really sort of lit a fire within me, I never told a single soul, not my friends, not any family, never talked about it. But deep down, that I was just like, let me prove you wrong. Let me prove you wrong. And so it really did serve as a motivator. I was able to graduate with, I think, high honors in high school, went through my undergrad in 4 years with some sort of honors. I can't remember quite which. And then later on, I got my master's degree, I got an MBA, and you can absolutely bet that when I came across the stage to get my master's diploma, I was thinking about those people who told me that, I didn't have a future. But the truth is, I ended up, if I look back at my career, it would have been, I wouldn't have been able to do the jobs that I did without being able to hear.
Yeah.
And the job that actually brought me to France, I was working in the operating room, doing clinical education with surgeons. And, so we had masks on and, there's no way I would have been able to do that job without hearing.
Yeah. But there are a lot of opportunities and a lot of ways that people who either don't or can't get a cochlear implant can still thrive with being deaf. So, and non-hearing. So what would that look like? What does that look like for people who, I guess my question is, how do people who can't get the cochlear implant, how do they thrive? Because it's all about thriving, right? And I think I want to highlight that there's different ways for everybody. We're all unique. And every video I say we're all unique, right? And we are. Not everybody is going to want to go the same career path you went or follow those same steps. So there are different avenues for different people.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think number one of the largest things I'm a huge proponent of, use whatever tools, whatever, if it, in terms of language, in terms of, not language, I take that back, communication. Use whatever form of communication. And we're so lucky now that texting, I was like, why couldn't this have existed when I was, how much easier my life would have been pre-cochlear implant to be able to.
And even this, right? It's every episode that we have is, if you watch on Facebook, is automatically given the subtitle, or not the subtitles, but the closed captions.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Which is a huge thing. And I love that they do that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think even especially since the pandemic, the social media platforms, certainly like Zoom and other platforms, they've really keyed into making sure that captioning was available. That's so important. Because, this is a little bit of a segue, or a sidestep, but isolation or feeling isolated is a global issue right now in the world. Not only, with hearing loss and that sort of communication, but with the aging population, and they, may not have the opportunity to speak with someone the entire day and that sort of thing. So anything that we can do to aid communication is a plus, and connection is a plus, and it's, it contributes to our overall health. But going back to your question, so there is absolutely ways to thrive if you don't have a cochlear implant, like this technology that we just talked about. Of course, American Sign Language, to communicate with ASL. Just any way that you can, any tool that you have or any way that you can aid communication, I think is a benefit. There is certainly, as I got older, actually worked for one of the cochlear implant manufacturers for about 8 years. And that's where I really got an introduction. So for me, growing up as being the only person that had hearing loss or deafness in the entire extended family and everyone that I knew, I tried to learn sign language at a few different times, but just like any other language, if you don't use it, you lose it. I mean, you have to constantly be utilizing it and working on it to develop fluency. And so for me, that hasn't really been, what I use, but I certainly encourage anyone else to. And I had learned during that time much more about the deaf culture. And so how we signify that is I am clinically deaf, I will say that. And we use a lowercase d to describe that deaf. And then there's uppercase D, a capital D deaf signifies deaf culture. And that's where they have, they do have their own culture. They have their own language, which is American Sign Language. So that's it's different. A different culture. And what we are seeing though in the past couple of decades is more acceptance, people being more accepting on both sides of it, and being like what I described as just utilize any communication tool that you can.
Yep. And work with people. It's nice to see people in law enforcement and healthcare who know American Sign Language, who know how to do various forms and types of communication, even if that's foreign languages. It's nice to have those abilities so that we can connect and we can communicate in various ways. And I like seeing that. We were talking right before the show went live about Coda and how well they did at the Oscars, and about Marley. And I remember watching the entire series of Switched at Birth, and that series gave so much insight into what it was like in the deaf culture, being non-hearing, and then being included into a hearing family. There's so many different levels to it. And I think people non-hearing, especially, or just people who aren't aware, don't understand those levels and don't understand the correct paths and the correct terminology, the correct way to communicate or be respectful of people who have, hearing loss or can't hear at all, right? So yeah. I love that we as a society are, like you said, accepting and encouraging this now and bringing it to the forefront and into the media, because we should all be accepted and loved. There shouldn't be judgment and stereotypes and assumptions made and prejudices because we have one thing or another. Just because you can't see somebody's disability, and again, I'm going to disability, yeah. Just because you can't see somebody's disability doesn't mean it's not impactful. It doesn't mean that it doesn't wholeheartedly impact everything that they do and every way that they express themselves. And a lot of people with disabilities, my daughter is a type 1 diabetic, and for her that is a disability, and it affected her self-worth. It affected, when she was diagnosed at 9, and it affected her self-worth, and it affected how she expressed herself in public. She had for a little while trouble doing her, what she needed to do for her health at school or while we were out, or there's so many things. And I think as a society, we need to be more accepting. We need to remove that judgment and be able to say, I accept that. I might not understand it. I might not know what it is. I might not understand how you deal with it or your emotions, but I accept that and I want to learn. And that's a huge step towards creating that space. So tell us, what do you think the biggest tips are for thriving with disabilities, no matter what the disability is?
I think you bring up, an excellent point, number one. So yes, we are talking specifically about hearing loss and deafness to an extent today, but it does translate. I can, as you were talking about your daughter, I can totally relate. I feel that, little girl Angela way back in grade school, middle school, high school, feeling shame and embarrassment because, unfortunately, we are conditioned from a very young age to fit in, to be like other people and to not have these differences. And so it is, it's through no fault of our own, but we do feel shame. We do feel embarrassment. And I wish that I had the tools that I now have way back then. And that's, a big driver in what I'm doing now is I don't want your daughter, I don't want anyone else to feel as badly as I did about myself around that. And I think we, like you said, it's just, I think just taking a breath and not making any assumptions and not being judgmental. So for example, going back to my experience with hearing loss, because I was trying to hide it, if someone would ask me a question and I didn't hear, instead of saying, I didn't have the confidence, I didn't have the self-worth, I didn't have any of that, I would just pretend that I heard them. Well, you can imagine how that goes down the wrong road really quickly. And to your point about the invisibility of it, so it would never occur to someone to think, oh, that child must have hearing loss. She answered wrong. No, they just thought I was not smart. And, that's where the horrible, horrible saying of deaf and dumb comes from, because people rush to judgment. They didn't think, oh, well, this could be just because they didn't hear. And, that happens a lot. It's like bad manners is another one that we tend to get, people with hearing loss and deafness. And it's just that we didn't hear something. I'll share a funny story. So there's some cochlear implant groups on Facebook. And just today, a woman posted, because she knew we could all relate, but she said, I love my husband very much. She said we were in an argument and he said to me, it would be really helpful for me if you could just let me know when you don't hear something that I say. And she said she just busted out laughing because it was so ridiculous. Now, he was perfectly earnest in his request, but she's like, how would I know? How would I know that you said something to me? I didn't hear it. And so I think that's where like CODA and will be a real blessing if, people watch that and, maybe they'll just, give people a benefit of the doubt if, they have an interaction like that, or just give people a better glimpse of what it is like to not have your hearing or to have, a hearing deficit. And so, so going back to your question of thriving with any disability, I think the most important thing is self-acceptance and understanding we all have something. We all have something. And I wish that was a lesson that I had learned decades ago as a small child, because I wasted so much time and energy trying to hide it, trying to pretend it wasn't there. And it's so much more freeing to now just be like, yep, have a cochlear implant. Here's how it works. Ask me any questions. And I know that's a hard thing. That's much easier said than done. And I learned that, like I said, later in life, but everybody's got something. I guarantee everyone has something. And like you said, I think that message, the takeaway message is just everyone be kind, everyone take a beat, everyone approach things with curiosity, I think would be another thing. Instead of forming some judgment, just go, I wonder what that might be. So those are some things that I would say.
Absolutely. Self-love, no matter whether you have what type of disability you have, no matter what you're struggling with or who you are, self-love is going to be your number one. It's one, knowing who you are. And if who you are is somebody who struggles with a disability, that's not, the disability is not your identity. It doesn't have to be a limitation. It doesn't have to be a defining characteristic of who you are. You are still you, with or without that disability. You're still yourself. Now, will it impact how you behave, what you say, what you do, how you feel? Absolutely, but it doesn't define who you are. And that's a big thing. Confidence is an interesting one. And you and I both work with confidence in one way, shape, or form, but I'll give an example of mine. I have a stomach issue. And while it's not a disability, I have a stomach issue. And every so often, and at the worst possible times, when I sit down to play a game of cards or whatever, it's just like, hi, I'm here. I'm like, oh God. My husband will get frustrated because of the timing. He gets really frustrated with the timing, and he's like, really, like, now why? And he gets really, really agitated. And I love my husband, and my husband loves me. But yeah, he'll get really agitated, and then I feel bad. Yeah. And it's not something I can control. So for me to feel bad about something I can't control talks about me, right? And talks about his acceptance of what I experience, but he doesn't understand it. So it triggers him, right? And I think for a lot of people who don't have, so say for me, somebody who is normal hearing but in a situation with somebody who is non-hearing and not understanding, right? And the frustration that can come with that, and I'm not saying me, there is obviously, I've been in a lot of situations where I have trouble communicating with somebody, and I get frustrated, not with that person, but with the fact that I struggle to communicate, whether that's a language barrier or a communication barrier, whatever that may be. But we need to take a step back when that happens and realize that even if we're getting frustrated with ourselves for our frustration or for what's going on, people with disabilities or people who aren't confident or secure may take that on. And that's hurtful, right? Yeah. So somebody not understanding that my daughter is a type 1 diabetic, right? And, all the stuff that she has to do with it, and getting frustrated that she has to do it, or making fun of somebody who has it. And she just sits back and goes, right? And she's 12, she takes it on.
Yeah, of course you do. Of course you do. That's the unfortunate thing. When you were just talking about that, there's, several things that jumped out at me or came to mind. I think number one, across any sort of anything that you might not understand, like I said, approach things with curiosity. Perhaps the best question we could ask anybody, no matter what the issue is or what they're dealing with, is, how can I make it easier for you? What can I do? Because I can tell you, obviously there was a little other drama at the Oscars the other night. The slap heard around the world. If I had $1 for every time I told someone, like you said, or as I shared before, that took me decades to be able to have that confidence or have that acceptance of it myself, to be able to say, hey, by the way, I have hearing loss, let alone deafness. When I don't have my cochlear implant processors, the external parts on, I am 1,000% deaf. Like, you could come behind me with banging pots and pans and drop a bomb, I would not hear it.
Yeah.
but I couldn't even bring myself to say deafness. My first step was I have hearing loss. Okay, whatever. At least I would say something. But if I had $1 for every time the response was, what? Ha ha ha. Now, I don't know if that's their uncomfortableness. It's not funny. It is hurtful. I just laugh it off at this point. But I can imagine as, younger people, anybody, we're sensitive to things that affect us.
Absolutely.
And that's, so I think that a simple question of how can I make this easier for you, or what can I do? Because, and another misconception for people with hearing loss, so I'll go back to that specifically, is they start to talk really loud. That is also not helpful. Facing us, most of us read lips. It was really interesting when the pandemic hit and we started wearing masks. The number of my normal hearing friends who were complaining, I can't understand what anyone's saying when they have their masks on. Welcome to our world.
Welcome to our, welcome to my world.
Right? Yeah. So it really is, even normal hearing people read lips or look at facial cues. And so that's a really simple thing. If it's, hearing loss related, is just to face people, let them see your lips, but speaking loudly is not helpful. So I can liken that to, imagine, for those who know what a radio station is, when you had a station, when you were turning the station, it was a little out of, yeah, exactly. And you had to turn to find the frequency, right? And sometimes it was out of tune. So imagine turning up a radio station that's got some static. It doesn't make it more clear. It just turns up the static. And that's what it's like to, to have hearing loss. And I think that was probably one of the biggest misconceptions people have, that it just will start to speak louder. And that's, I understand where that comes from, but at the end of the day, it doesn't really help us. It actually hinders us from understanding as well. So
you mentioned the slap heard across the world, and I had to text my husband to ask him permission to talk about that, because that hits home for us. We were watching the Oscars when that smack hit, and I was just like, whoa, like, really? What just happened? And so I Googled it throughout the night. And while I was Googling it, I got the notification that Jada Pinkett Smith actually has what's called alopecia. Now, I'm quite knowledgeable on alopecia because my husband has alopecia. And he has no hair. And when we first got together and we first got married, his hair was patched. And he would have patches of hair on his head, and the rest would be baby bottom smooth, right? And he still, we got married 13 years ago, and he wore a hat for our wedding photos. And I had no issues with that. I thought he looked great in a hat, and I had no problem with that. I would have got married in jeans. I didn't care. I just wanted to marry him. But he was very self-conscious about that. And even now, over the last 13 years, he's lost all the hair on his head. He has little peach fuzz now, and it's white and it's gorgeous, but he doesn't see it. I do. And even now, if I take a picture of him and he's not wearing a hat or a toque, you can tell I'm Canadian, toque, if he's not wearing a hat or a toque, he will look at the picture and he said, I look like Mr. Clean, or I look like a cancer patient. Because he's very white, no hair. And so even something like that, when Chris Rock made the joke about G.I. Jane, you've got to wonder whether he knew or didn't know. Either way, he's a comedian, and comedians do make inappropriate jokes quite often, right? Because they're comedians, that's their job. But at the same time, he touched on a subject that was very touchy and something that was not laughed at on her end. Now, I disagree with the violence. Obviously, I understand the frustration. I understand the anger. We all have that. But again, it was making fun of whether he knew or not. And I can't speak on Chris Rock's behalf, but whether he knew or not, he was touching on something that was triggering and emotional for them. And so I think both aspects, there were right and wrong in both of those. Definitely. But again, it was the assumption.
Yeah.
And it's not right. I think that no matter what you're dealing with, no matter what life has thrown at you, no matter what you're trying to survive or thrive, no matter what you're trying to survive, you have the capability and the ability to thrive, to make something out of it, to make it happy and healthy, and learn to live with it, and realize that just because some of those limits are in place doesn't mean that you can't have a limitless life. My daughter, for example, with her type 1 diabetes, it's the assumption that there is quite a difference between type 1 and type 2 diabetes. And my daughter is a type 1, which means that her pancreas does not produce insulin at all. There is no insulin production. So no matter what she eats, no matter how much she eats, no matter how much she diets, that's not going to change. Type 2 diabetes there's not enough, right? It's not producing enough insulin. So with diet and exercise, it's manageable in a different way, where my daughter lifelong will be on insulin. That doesn't mean she can't eat 4 slices of pizza, birthday cake, and ice cream. It just means that she has to treat it, right? And give her and do something about it so she can have a fully functioning life. She just has to make sure that she does what she needs to do in order to have that healthy life. And I think no matter what situation you're in or what you're struggling with, you have those capabilities. You can find something that you still love. You can find something that you're drawn towards, that you want to do, whether it's helping others who have the same disability, whether it is helping others find self-love, whether it's, if you are deaf, if you can't see, if you're blind, there are options that you can do. And I think not enough people feel confident enough a lot of people can become overwhelmed with their disease and put limitations on themselves of what they can achieve and what they can achieve.
I agree with that 100%. You've said a lot of wonderful things in that piece. And I think there is a lot of it that is around our mindset and our attitude and how we approach things. And going back to the Cochlear Implant Facebook groups, or again, a lot of times people will come on and, say, well, why can't people just understand, about this? Or why don't they understand this or that and the other? And yes, it is frustrating. Of course, we wish everyone understood. You just educated me, more about my knowledge of, type 1 and type 2 diabetes. So I think that's helpful. And so I always tell people, try to approach it. I know it can be frustrating, but just take a step back. We need to do that as well. So we're asking others to take a step back and be curious. But I think we can also take a step back, take a deep breath, and use it as a teaching moment, just like you just did for all of us.
Yep.
Which is really important as well. And so we can kind of go, okay, cochlear implants have been around for 41 years, and less than 10% of the people who could benefit from them have this technology. So I'll say that once more. The technology has been around for 41 years, and less than 10% of the people globally who could benefit from this technology have it. So it's not well known, unfortunately. And that's one of the things that, I'm so grateful to have this conversation where we can, hopefully even get the word cochlear implant out in the vernacular would be helpful. So we need to think about that. People, of course, they're not going to understand the difference. Most people don't even realize there's an external component that is operated by batteries. So my batteries die throughout the day and I have to change them. And in those times, I can't hear anything while I'm doing that. We can expect that the average person knows about that. So that's where I think it's really important. And as you just highlighted so well, we approach, these opportunities as a teaching moment and not ourselves take it so much to heart, and just, look at it from a different perspective.
I'm going to elaborate on that. So I have to throw this out there because it is mid-episode. So I wanted to let everybody know. Again, please like, follow, and share the show on whatever social media platform you are active on. You can find it at Just Alive TV. Please go and connect with justalivetv.com. You can find all of our episodes. And this episode is sponsored by a Phoenix Identity, who does, burn everything up, burn it to the ground, change whatever you need to change, reclaim your identity, and create a life that you are in charge of that makes you happy and healthy. And the reason I did that now is because I want to go into something that I teach. And with identity and me owning a Phoenix Identity, I teach mindset. And a lot of that mindset is emotional. So our emotions are 100%, I'm going to even say 1,000%. I'm going to go overboard here. Yeah. Our emotions are entirely created by our own beliefs. Yeah. So if you're going into a situation and you're not open-minded and you're focusing on your own beliefs, all you're going to focus on is how your beliefs trigger your reactions. Instead of having that teaching moment and sitting back, remove your emotions, remove your beliefs, and just sit there and understand. And society needs to do that in every respect, is sit back and say, I can listen to what you have to say. I can try to understand where you're coming from. I can try to see it from your perspective, even if I don't understand it, even if I don't know what that looks like. I can take a step back and control my beliefs, control my emotions, and actually listen. And listening isn't just for hearing.
Yes.
Listening is actually paying attention to what somebody is communicating to you so that you are retaining that information, processing that information, and understanding that information so that you can see things from somebody else's perspective. That's communication.
Yes.
That doesn't have to be verbal. That doesn't have to be physical. It doesn't have to be mental. It's putting yourself on hold so that you can hear or process what somebody else is actually saying. And not enough people do that. I always say, I have a superpower, and whether anybody believes me or not, you're welcome to join me and have that conversation. I have a superpower, and this is what enables me to be an expert in my field, is that I am analytical, and I can put myself emotionally, mentally, and physically in just about anybody's situation and understand the thought processes and the emotions that come with that. So I may not have experienced being a non-hearing individual, somebody who's deaf. I may not have experienced that, but I know the mentality behind it. I know the struggle behind it. I can put myself into that situation. Now, to turn that around, I can't say with 100% surety or even 50 what my reaction to that situation would be, because there's so many. There's so many different ways that people adjust. There's so many ways that people accept. There's people who will be diagnosed with something or born with something, And they can turn that into a victim mentality, and they can spend the rest of their lives sitting in a victim mentality rather than taking what's going on in their life and creating something better. Right? So being able to see it from that perspective, you can't say that the way and where I was going with this, I can tell you, I can understand where you're at because I'm different. That's just the way I am. But a lot of people will put their own projection into what you're telling them. And that's a line we shouldn't be crossing. I can't tell with what happened with Will and Jada and Chris Rock. I can say that he reacted the way that he did because of X, Y, and Z. I can understand why he did that. I can understand it all. But I can't say I would have done that differently because I'm not in that situation. I haven't experienced that. I haven't been put into a position where somebody made fun of my husband or my husband's condition, and I have to now feel, or I feel at that point that I need to defend them. I'm not in that situation. So I can say I would do it differently. I could say that that wasn't right, but it's not my situation. It's not my right to sit there and say, I would do this, or I would do that, or that's hard to do. So for people who aren't in that disability or that situation or that struggle, no matter what it may be, you don't know why they're not thriving. You don't know whether they're thriving the way they want to be thriving. What thriving looks like for me isn't going to look the same for somebody else. Like you, right? You had trouble learning sign language. That doesn't mean that you weren't thriving, because you're thriving in a different way. Somebody who does learn ASL and doesn't want a cochlear implant, they may be thriving in a different way. I think just global acceptance that there are multiple ways for people to thrive. And no matter what you're struggling with, whether that's mental health, physical health, disabilities, none of that, it matters, but it doesn't matter in whether we accept people or not. And I loved the Oscars this year because there were so many aspects of acceptance. So many aspects of acceptance that you haven't seen in prior years. You had multiple LGBTQ members. You had multiple races. There was so much diversity in the awards that I actually enjoyed it because it was accepting. It was inclusivity, which is one of the things that I thrive for on this show, is to teach non-judgmental, to teach safe space, to teach understanding, healthy communication, and above all else, inclusivity, because nobody deserves to not be included because we don't understand their situation.
Yeah, so many fantastic nuggets and messages in there. So I'm going to go back and watch this as well, but just so many things. I mean, that's, people, as human beings, we're wired. We want to be included. We want to be a part of a community. We want to be heard. We want to be seen, understood. All of those, just the most innate human conditions that we have. And like you said, so taking the judgment out is such an important thing. And the mindset piece is so critical because, like you said, you can easily fall into the victim mentality of whatever you might be going through. And I would say that would be the common denominator of how you will not thrive. So everything else aside, no matter what the condition, your mentality, your mindset is going to be the thing that holds you back from thriving or not. Because like you said, I love that, what you said about we need to understand there's multiple ways. There's not just one way. There's not just one way to thrive. What works for me is not, I mean, look at Marley Matlin, we're like at the opposite ends. She does not have hearing technology. I think she has used not cochlear implants, hearing aids and what, but look at her. She's clearly thriving, with ASL, and she does speak, with her voice and stuff as well. So,
we assume that she's thriving though.
Well, she's had a decades-long acting career in her chosen, as far as I know, it's a chosen field. And absolutely. She was just on stage at the Oscars. So to your point, I shouldn't make that assumption, but yes.
that is a huge assumption. You look at Miss Universe 2019. You look at Robin Williams. You look at Kate Spade. You look at some of the most influential and beautifully talented people in the world that we assume have it all. We assume they have it all. We don't know what their mentality is like. We don't know whether they're thriving or whether they're surviving. That is one of the things I find being in the media, whether that be whatever high profile position you're at, politics, government, actors, actresses, musicians, disabilities, there is this ideal that because you've made it, and I'm going to say made it in quotations, because you've made it, you have nothing to complain about. Your life is great. There's that assumption made that because your situation on the outside is better than mine, you have nothing that would make it so that your life is not thriving. And that is actually, that's one of my biggest passions, is talking about people in the spotlight who have to keep up appearances. It's like your comment about being deaf and dumb, right? The assumption that you don't want to tell people that you're deaf. You don't want to tell people that you are hard of hearing or whatever situation. Sorry, my cat walked in the door. Whatever situation you may be having, you don't want to express that to people, because what will people think of you? What will people say about you? What part of their life are they going to turn on you? If I remember watching an episode of, or I caught it on social media because I scroll Facebook and TikTok and everything all the time. I'm scrolling Facebook and I catch a 5-minute clip of Keeping Up with the Kardashians. And Kourtney Kardashian is on there and she's talking to Khloe and she says, "I'm not happy." And she's crying. She says, "I have everything I could want and I'm not happy." Now, everybody who's not in their position could go, "But you have everything. You're successful. You have a family. You are loved. What do you have to not be happy about?" That's similar. It's not the same, but it's similar. There's an appearance, or because you can't physically see what's going on with somebody, whether their life situation, their disabilities, because you can't see it, you assume that their life is better than yours, or you assume that they have nothing to complain about, because everybody wants to complain. Everybody wants to feel like somebody's better than them, or that they're worse off than somebody else. A majority of the time, that's a victim mentality statement. What do you have to complain about? Your life is great, blah, 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 right? But it's that assumption that people in high profile positions are thriving. And we don't know that because we're not them. We're not in their situation, right? There are a lot of negatives that come with being in the spotlight that none of us understand. I do, again, superpower. That's just my weirdness coming out. But I'm definitely an advocate for, I want to truly be an advocate for everybody. I want to be able to advocate that everybody struggles. Everybody in this world struggles with something. Nobody gets away without negativity. Nobody. We are guaranteed 3 things in life: taxes, death, and negativity. Those are our 3 guarantees. And no matter what that negativity looks like, every single one of us experiences it at one way, shape, or form, whether we grow up in a rich family and are silver spoon fed. Maybe our parents are cold and we're never shown love and we don't learn how to love, right? Everybody's got a story, just like you said. Everybody's got something. Everybody has a story. Everybody has something that makes them unhappy. And being able to create that judgment-free zone and that safe space, and to be able to acknowledge and accept people for who they are and where they're at and how they feel, because ultimately that's our goal, right? We want to feel a certain way. We want to feel loved and feel accepted and feel acknowledged and feel like we're heard, whether it's physically heard or just understood, right? I apologize for my daughter in the background. She's playing with her boyfriend, and I quotate both boyfriend because she's 8. She's playing with her friend and she gets super loud and just gets this ridiculous giggle in the back.
Don't squash that, right? Don't squash
I'm not. No, it's cute, but I keep kind of like, Haley, be quiet. Just like, I'm sorry, Mom. But yeah, it's comical. My husband and I giggle.
I absolutely agree. And again, the more we can, unfortunately, human nature is we are judgmental. And so it's always so helpful just to like take the breath, remind yourself, everybody's going through something, approach it with curiosity, try not to, like you said, try not to project your own lens of what might be happening. I don't know, maybe have a nuanced, I don't know. I never really thought about what, and exactly the way that you said it. So yes, 100%, we look at Robin Williams, Kate Spade, all that you mentioned and think they've got it made. They don't have a care in the world. They don't have anything to be unhappy about, to complain about. Totally understand that. I think maybe I might look at it a little nuanced, and they did thrive. They did thrive in their chosen field. It doesn't mean that they're 100% happy 100% of the time, which obviously, of course, was not the case. I don't know. It's an interesting thing to think about. But I think, the mental health part is something that, we could talk for days and weeks about. Yeah. And it's such an important thing too. And just like you're saying, this stigma, it does have to be even, so much more difficult to seek out or to admit that, one is having some mental health challenges if you are so in the spotlight like that, because like you said, the first response from people would be, well, what do you have to be? You've got everything everyone could, and imagine that heaviness. So of course they're not going to probably say that, because they know that's how it would probably be perceived and that what that response would be. So they hold it in, which of course compounds the situation. So really good stuff.
And I'll bring it back to this topic specifically, right? Thriving is a mentality. You yourself are thriving. And thriving will look different for each individual person as well, right? Thriving, you can be outwardly thriving. And so let's say you have an invisible disability, right? And nobody knows about this invisible disability, but it eats you up inside, because we do know that disability, the number one is your mentality, right? And if you have the mentality that you want to thrive and you want to create something bigger and better, and you understand who you are, self-love, confidence, the no limitations, all of that, thriving looks different for everybody. And there's different stages of thriving for everybody, right? For me, doing this show every day, I'm thriving. Is the show where I want it to be? No. Am I at Oprah status yet? No, but I'm still thriving regardless of where I've gotten, right? The monetary, the situational, the Thriving to me is a mentality. It's not where we are. It's not what we make or who we know. It's inside of us saying, you know, whether I'm working a 9 to 5 job and I'm living paycheck to paycheck, but I have a family that loves me and I have everything that I need and everything that I want, and I don't have aspirations to be the next Oprah, let's say, then I would be thriving, right? Thriving, again, is an individual belief, an individual ideal that this is what I want my life to look like, or I'm happy with my life. Thriving can be anything. My cats thrive as long as they get to eat and sleep and get some love. They're thriving, right? Like, they're not on the street. They're not, you know, they have it made. But my one cat probably doesn't think he's thriving because he wants to go outside all the time, and I won't let him outside. So it's, again, thriving is a mentality. Thriving is almost the opposite of a victim mentality.
Yes, I
if
do.
You think about it that way.
100% agree with that, and agree that you know, thriving would look different for each of us. What does that? I'll use the word aspiration. That's the perfect word. But I definitely do want to call out that it's, you know, I absolutely. It's not all unicorns and rainbows every day. In fact, there's a lot of days where when you're constantly trying to get out of your comfort zone to go after those aspirations, you're going to get met with, it's just the way the brain is wired, because it's trying to keep us safe. When you know, step out of the comfort zone, it's almost that same, the body releases cortisol and things like that. That it's almost like, you know, stepping off the curb and a bus is coming. You know, it's that same thing, even though, you know, the brain can't determine what's real and perceived threats. And sort of the irony, I know we're coming to time here, but the irony of me doing what I'm doing now and thriving in a different way than I did in my corporate job is that I actually, when I did that career change, I went into depression for the first time in my life, because I had never dealt with those emotions that I talked about at the beginning. I had never really talked to anybody about what I felt while I was losing my hearing, the fear I had, the shame I had, the embarrassment. I never dealt. I pushed down. And when I went through my coaching certification, that came up. I couldn't get out of bed. I was so disoriented. I didn't recognize myself. So that was a lot of hard work to then get back. So, I mean, you know, like you said, you work in the confidence space as well. That was hard fought, climbing out of a dark hole. But once I was able to do that, it doesn't mean that it doesn't rear its ugly head very often. But I was like, this is what I want to help people with, because in that process is when I was finally able to have this self-acceptance that I wish I had had for decades before. And when I wasn't hiding, when I said, this is me, or, you know, started slowly to say, this is more of me, like the real 100%, that's when people were like reciprocating. That was so shocking to me. People revealed stuff. One of my best girlfriends that I've known from 4th grade that lives in my hometown, we're still so super close. She revealed stuff to me from 4th grade, moving to a new town, and how she felt not knowing anybody, and how she was treated, which I was so caught up in my own world, I wasn't paying attention. So I guess that might be some parting words is, it is so liberating to accept yourself, and to, as hard as that can be, I guarantee people will respond in kind. Of course, there's always going to be the haters, as they say. There's always going to be, don't waste the time on them. You're going to find, like, look at us, like we found each other across the ocean, and, you know, have a joint mission to want to foster a world with more acceptance and less judgment, and helping people thrive, however that looks. You'll always find the like-minded people. You really will. And I guess maybe I'll end with that.
Absolutely. You talking about, pushing all of those emotions down. I just rebranded my company, a Phoenix Identity. And the reason I did that, my son and I got matching tattoos for his 19th birthday, and we got phoenixes.
Oh my God.
And so because when he was 13 and when I was 13, we ended up going through very similar situations where we left home. We were on the run. We went through some really heavy times. And through all of that, we needed to learn who we were. And so at some point, we blew it all up. We burnt everything to the ground and recreated, or not recreated, but reclaimed our identity. And I'm an identity coach. And so I rebranded to a Phoenix Identity, because when a phoenix doesn't like, and it's a mythical creature, of course, but I love it. When a phoenix no longer likes its life and isn't happy in its life, it burns itself to the ground. Now, I'm not saying literally do this for anybody watching. This is not literal, okay? Not literal. But when there's things going on in our life that aren't making us happy, that aren't helping us thrive, that aren't, helping us accept who we are, we need to burn it to the ground, get rid of it. I help people do that. So what I do is I help people get rid of all that crap that's not making them happy. I help them reclaim who they are at their core. And that's everything. So we basically transform all of that negativity and say, how is this making me stronger? How is it making me smarter? How have I grown because of what's going on and what I didn't like? And how is that going to help me change my life? So burn it to the ground, reclaim your energy or reclaim your identity, and then take charge of your life and create it your way for you. Now, that doesn't mean you have to change everything. You don't have to change your career. You don't have to change your partner or whatever, but changing how you love and accept yourself and how you express that, that's the key. You're not changing who you are. You're changing how you feel about yourself, and you're changing how you express that to the world. Now, that goes for everybody watching. That goes for everybody with a disability. You are not defined by your roles. You're not defined by your titles. You're not defined by your disabilities or your abilities. You are defined by who you feel you are at your core. That doesn't change. In a way it does. It morphs a little bit as you grow, right? Because the purpose of being alive is to experience, learn, and grow. That's our purpose. And a lot of us, like you and I, will take our experiences and create something huge out of it that is meant to help the world. And that's what this show is. That's why I created the show. That's why I started coaching and spiritual teaching, because I wanted a space where people felt no judgment. They felt safe to open up, and they felt safe to heal and become who they truly want to be. And that's what this show, that's what all my businesses are about. And I'm sure yours as well, right? Confidence, being and standing in who you are, and giving yourself those opportunities. And that's what the world should be doing.
Yeah, 100%. So that's why I say the foundation of lasting confidence starts with increasing your self-acceptance and increasing your self-esteem. And then that's when you can, but first of all, I love the new branding. And that it's like so a part of you, makes it even more awesome. And I just think you're amazing in what you're doing to make a difference in the world.
Thank you very much. I love what I do, and the look on people's faces. Everybody's like, why do you do what you do? And I can tell you the why. I started coaching when a couple very high profile people committed suicide, as well as my son was going through his issues at that time. And I just wanted to help people love themselves and create something and heal in a way that they didn't understand how. And that's my goal with the show, with everything else, is to non-judgment, safe space, acceptance, inclusivity, because inclusivity is going to be that key that unlocks a lot of doors and a lot of windows to let that light shine in. All right.
Absolutely.
Well, for anybody watching, please go like, subscribe, follow, sign up for our newsletter at www.justalivetv.com. This is giving you something to talk about. I would like to thank you, Angela, so much for joining me today. I really appreciated it.
Awesome. Thank you for having me. Oh my gosh, had such a diverse conversation. I love it.
We usually end up on tangents. It's okay. I like tangents. That's where the meaty stuff comes in. Well, if anybody wants to connect with either myself or Angela, you can do so in the links provided in the description of this video or the podcast, whichever one you're watching or listening to or reading. If you are reading the podcast, please go and check out our links in the description. Again, this episode is sponsored by A Phoenix Identity, where we help you burn it all to the ground, reclaim your identity, and create something that's bigger and better and makes you happy. So lots of love, just a family. Thank you again, Angela, and I will see everybody on the next episode.
Bye. Thank you.